Are you there? I think we're gonna get started with like an actual web client bug fix. We're gonna do it live on the web, November 7th, 2015.
Do you know what the fix is already?
10 bucks.
Maybe. It involves some recursion though. It's gonna be fun. It's one of the few times I actually write recursion is in some of these things. Is anybody going to be following along in Visual Studio or on GitHub?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll try to streamline this and let me share my screen and.
Is there
What's that?
I had a software question. Is there a hard dependency on Visual Studio, or are you just using it as a code editor?
We've never run it outside of Visual Studio.
But I mean, is Visual Studio compiling some stuff in the end?
Yeah.
It creates the server. So, the server is, it's got the .NET runtime,
Not all normal.
right? We're doing things like, the server that renders the views for the website is, the MVC5 Razor view engine, and in the web client, it's still using the ASPX web forms model. We still have links, I believe, to default.aspx. So we're pretty tied to, if you know of a development environment that will run .NET 4.5 is the framework we're in, and run ASPX. That's sort of the scaffolding. So it also. Jonathan's making a point, by the way.
Building the tools requires Visual Studio right now. That's a fairly high building APIs for all your sources does not necessarily require Visual Studio at all. And some of them, whatever JavaScript entity that you want, whatever website you want hosted in. The particular instances of our tools are fairly closely tied to Visual Studio. Somebody could break them out,
right?
In their own instance of it, but to build our instances out. Still, our APIs and our services don't necessarily have to have it.
I don't know if you guys heard what Jonathan just said, but he said basically the APIs that we have, the services and the tile generators, things like that. You don't need Visual Studio to consume them, but to generate them and to make modifications to our instance of the tools is Visual Studio, and that's just a product of this coming out of Microsoft. It's got Microsoft tooling, Microsoft operating systems, and that's where it's at right now. And if somebody wants to try to get it to work in another environment, if it's worth the time and investment, then we could certainly talk about that. Because we get this complaint a lot, because I see a lot of MacBook Pros over there, and you don't usually see Visual Studio running in MacBooks. So, but that being said, we're going to go into Visual Studio project.
I think I just downloaded this Visual Studio for Mac.
Yeah, they're working on making one for Mac and Linux. So.
Yeah, but I don't know how to use it. I will get the file.
Okay, I hear chatter over there.
Go for it.
All right. So, and Doug, I hope this is the bug you wanted me to address.
Yes, and there's a PowerPoint. You can either follow along in PowerPoint or in Visual Studio if you want to watch, or just watch the screen share.
Yeah, you can pop open the slide deck if you want, although you'll see the answer to the question before I get to it, which would just be wrong. But anyhow, so let's go look at worldwidetelescope.org today, because I haven't actually fixed it. Why is it not opening it? Here it is. Okay. Ooh, we just crashed. Caltech just crashed. Yeah.
What? Caltech crash?
Mm.
I think that might be another. Is that another tab, or is that?
Crashed.
It's not important. Let's move on. So, look at these, all these gnarly constellation pictures they're really fun on a certain sense, but I want to turn them off, and I just want to look at nebulas. So I unchecked this. I had just unchecked constellations, and nothing happened. Checking and unchecking overlays does nothing. Checking and unchecking sky does nothing. So clearly there's something wrong with our layer manager. So basically that's these bubbles here are explaining the problem. So if we go to the next page, what I would expect is that unchecking the parent node of a tree would turn off any checked child settings and disable all the descendants so that you can't change the state of the checkbox. It's not exactly how the Windows client works, but I think to really properly fix this, I'd like to see a disabled state, a disabled checked, and a disabled unchecked state for any child of an unchecked parent. So
Check this.
Jonathan's being funny. So checking a parent enables children, invokes the setting of checked, and children of an unchecked parent would not be clickable. And a visual indication. So does everybody have a sense for like what we need to do to this right here? Everybody in the room? It's pretty standard bug, and I'll just tell you the reason why it wasn't implemented to begin with was that there were actually settings that looked like the SDK would actually handle checking and unchecking the children, and so I would wire those checkboxes up to the settings, but they apparently did nothing, and maybe they were just stubs or something, but that was the assumption that I made initially, and never got around to actually saying, oh my god, it doesn't actually work, we should probably wire up some relationship with parents and children. So what we need to do is pop open the layer manager controller. And I think before we do that, I think we should look at just sort of the general web client UI ecosystem. So this is a heavy Angular app. And did I think I have a slide where there's a grunt file that I want to make sure that if this doesn't have it in it, yeah, okay, it does have it. So let's go back over here to the layer manager controller. First, just show you the different folders, app data. That has basically a server-side detection of whether you're in a mobile device or if you're in a regular browser. And it's the only reliable way to do it. So if you open it on your iPhone or your Windows phone or your Android, you're going to get a different rendering of the page. It wasn't really possible to do this site with a classic bootstrap responsiveness. It was too complex. And so we actually render different versions of the page for a mobile device. And that third-party framework is, the data for that goes here. The client bin has to do with the old Silverlight file, which is still operational but hardly used anymore. The content, well, it currently just has the Bootstrap file. So it used to have images and it used to have CSS in there, but this is just the Bootstrap framework, which is sort of an artifact of when it was rolled together with the website, and we use a lot of the modal dialogues and things there. So is everyone in the room, or is anyone in the room familiar with JavaScript MVC frameworks?
Yes.
Anyone familiar with the concept of an MVC client-side framework?
2 people raise their hands.
Yes.
On our side. 3
4.
people. 4.
Excellent. Okay, this is going to be a lot of fun then. Who's familiar with Angular? How many people are raising their hand?
4 in the room.
How many people have written a lot of Angular code?
1.
1.5.
1.5.
Okay. Okay. Well, that helps me, so I know, you know, if anybody is going to understand any of it, because sometimes Angular is one of those frameworks that has a bit of an entry, kind of a rough entry, because it's a little bit of a departure from how JavaScript architectures are usually handled, and it's kind of an all-encompassing framework. But so the controllers
Ron?
have, what's that?
Ron, can I interrupt for a second? Just to thank you to the crowd here. They weren't kick us out at 6. I asked them, because of technical issues, if we can stay a little bit later, and we could push things till 7. Would that be useful for everybody? And then push our dinner reservations. So we're very close to thing at 7:15 for dinner. Would that be okay for people who can? I know you have to leave at 5:30, but.
And I can skip the overview and just go right into the problem if we're running short on time too.
Well, I mean,
don't want to take all of Jonathan's time.
Yeah. So anyway, I'll tell them that we're going to do this. I'd say just try to go quickly, but I wouldn't skip the overview because it does give the context.
Okay. Yeah. I'll just generally go over it. So the controllers, each tab has a controller. So if we were to compare, say, we look here, we see we've got Explorer, Guided Tours, Search, View, and Settings, and then there's these cute hidden tabs like ADS equals Crew, and we get it in ADS mode. Nobody knew about that. And if you then there's a login feature, which I'm not going to show, but there's different tabs, and those tabs have controllers. So if you're looking for like how does the Explorer work, you go in here and you look at this file, and I'll try to make my code viewer 150%. But in this case, the controller that we're looking for that manages the interaction of a view is this layer manager controller, and we're going to come back to that after I just give you a little bit more of a rundown of what else is here. But our target starting place is going to be this guy. So next we have controls, which are the move control is how we do value sliding. It's something that handles various things like pointer events, and it's this wonderful bit of code that allows you to move things around on the screen. And then the CSS we use is compiled down from a technology called Less. And there's basically 2 frameworks you can use, Less or Sass. We use Less because that's what I'm familiar with, and that's what Bootstrap is built on top of. And it's easy to just sort of hack into Bootstrap by compiling it together. And then there's a few other little bits that are rolled in with that. Everywhere where we're getting data from somewhere goes through these little Angular factories in the data proxy folder. So the astrometry, image solving, fetching data for communities, getting the places, the Explorer panel, the search data is its own little animal. It also populates the bottom, this bottom context panel. So if you hear me say context panel, I'm referring to this, and the nearby images. I got to get rid of Constellation Pictures. they're cute, but they're killing me. And so the search data manages that and this. So it's sort of a common hub to manage the state of the data. And then the tours is another data proxy. Directives, the most important directive, the most relevant, I think, is the context menu, not the context menu, I'm sorry, the localization directive. So in the code, you're not going to find any plain English strings. Instead of English strings, you're going to see things like localize equals, use layer manager to control user settings. So these localize attributes actually talk to a directive which goes and fetches the localized version of that string for your environment if it's available. If not, it'll just default and populate the HTML with the raw English string. So there's more to be said about that, but I'm going to try to keep moving down. The scroll just has to do with the infinite progressive scrolling capabilities of a mobile device. Instead of having paging controls, we have a scroll control, and that gets used on phones. These are external libraries. That's what the external folder is. And going down, factories. These are all just shared bits of code, little libraries that handle things like rendering out the sky ball, the little yellow thing, or things that are common across different things, like the thumbnail list is something that's used by about 4 different controllers. And there's all sorts of little goodies in here. The Finder scope, the app state, which makes your settings sticky on your browser, and later we'll tie that to your logged in user account. But for now, it's just it just uses local storage, which is similar to a cookie, to store that. So a bunch of cool code in the factories. Fakes assemblies probably should be deleted. We don't need it anymore. I needed it when I was emulating something, and it just accidentally got checked in. Sorry about that. Then images, we all know what those are. And then you'll see that when you, if you start running the grunt stuff to minify your JavaScript, it'll create a node modules folder. You can ignore that. It's internal to Node Package Manager. And then we compile the SDK into this folder, and then from there we have to strip out some of the they wrap it in some require.js scaffolding, which basically breaks backward compatibility if we keep it. So I have some grunt stuff that runs that strips that back out and replaces it. So if you're ever going to make a change to the WWT lib, compile it and run it, you want to make sure you're running your grunt watch. And we'll do that as soon as I finish going through the views and the rest of these things. So the views here are all the little HTML fragments that are used by various things. They're sort of self-explanatory. The mobile ones are prefixed with mobile that are just only used for mobile phones. So like I said, there's basically 2 different versions of the UI. A full browser and tablet experience, and then the mobile phone experience. And popovers are basically like rich tooltips with a little arrow next to it, in case you're wondering. So, and then the rest of this, you've got your minified file, your minified JavaScript file, which is this WWT web client.min.js, or a full concatenated file. And then here's the output of the SDK. And then you can run these either when you're running them, just like before, you can set your debug here in the query string, and it'll read it out. I guess it's not going to give me any sort of formatting either, so let's just collapse that. But what you can see is if debug, so if we're in debug or debug just the Chrome, then output all of these files individually. Otherwise, if we're in production mode, just output the minified file. And the resources version is so that the CDN, when we run it on the website, I think we're putting these up on the CDN, and the CDN's referencing them. And so, if you know how CDN... okay, Jonathan wanted me to define what a CDN is. Cache distribution network is basically a place... Oh, content delivery network. Cache distribution, right? Huh, okay. He says, sorry, I have my TLA wrong. It's a content delivery network. Basically, you can put a library like jQuery lives on a CDN, because if somebody loads jQuery in their browser from some other popular website, and then I get to it, and I'm pointed to the same, and I get to a page. Sorry, if I go to a website that has jQuery on it, and then I go to another website that's pointing to the same jQuery, my browser already has it cached, and it's just there, and it sees it, and it's good. And it also, the CDNs manage where a particular resource is fetched. So some CDNs have thousands of nodes all over the world, and you can basically distribute your CSS, your images, your JavaScript, and things that are not calculated resources. Like an ASPX page is a calculated resource, and it's going to change, so you can't really put that on a content delivery network. So to invalidate the cache, we track this resources version in the web.config. I don't think it's as big of a deal when you're running it locally to have this here, but when you're putting it in production, you absolutely have to change this version, because people are going to have old versions of the script and old versions of the CSS running with your new code, and it's pretty awkward when those are out of sync. So that's the reason behind this. So let's run the grunt file, run a grunt watch, just so you can see what is available. And that basically has, it looks like there's 4 tasks. The one that you're going to be most interested in is dist.js, which is distributable JS, SDK, and the CSS. And Grunt Watch will take care of all that for you. So what it does is it looks for changes in script files and watches particular directories and executes the proper command. So if it detects that you just essentially compiled the SDK down from the C# into JavaScript, it'll say, oh, I need to go through and concatenate a couple files together and strip out the required JS stuff. So I know that was a lot of stuff to go through, but I thought I'd give you guys an overview first, and then we can get Grunt going, and we can get back to the actual bug fix. So go to the project directory, which is web client, the hyphens. We changed repositories many times. And then the grunt watch. Okay, and it's watching. So just to show what it does, like I can add a space to, since we're going to be modifying Layer Manager Controller, I'll add a space to Layer Manager Controller, save it, and watch. It says, ooh, Layer Manager Controller changed. Let's concatenate all the files together, uglify it, and minify it. And so now it's waiting for another change. And if I change a less file, it'll do the same thing. I think so. Yeah. I read some articles about optimizing JavaScript and came to the conclusion that it would be better to have a minification story. I've talked to other devs. It's kind of, a lot of guys don't, but you can run it both ways. Minify? Uglification basically takes your JavaScript file and takes anything that doesn't need to have a hard-coded name and turns it into variables like A, B, C, D. So instead of seeing var my pretty constellation object, it'll say var A, and then var B and var C, and so it becomes very unreadable without a lot of work to actually reverse engineer what it's talking about. So for those of you remote, they were asking why I minify the code and what minification actually is. So
Ron, Ron,
oh.
help. Hold on.
Yeah.
Never mind. I'm going to come over here and ask. Do you spring up the terminal window so I can see how you started the grunt watch?
Can I bring up the terminal window?
Yeah, I was trying to follow along, but.
Oh, okay. So basically, wherever you clone the repo into, and I'll just mark this here, I cloned it into this directory here. And then the grunt lives in the web client project.
Thanks.
So you'll see in the project itself, can I just go back to the project and show you? There's this grunt file.js in the root of the web client. Whatever directory that file is in, that's the directory that you want to run grunt from. And there's installation instructions on how to get going. It's in the I think it's in the install.md. It used to be like the README, but I think we broke it out into an install.md. There might be README.
Install.
Yeah, getting started. Okay. So there's all these instructions here, and I'm, in the interest of time, sort of not rat-holing down the grunt, because I could spend a lot of time talking about it. But it's a pretty common feature in the web development community, and there's lots of resources out there to help with that. But I think what would be really fun is to get more specific and go into this layer manager issue. Sound good?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So basically, going back to the slide deck, so the model in the layer manager controller is a simple tree of objects with the following properties. So let's look at how the layer manager is actually constructed, and it's that left-hand side view. So I see that there's this constructor called a tree node. And then I can see that there's this init tree function here that returns a new tree node with children that are tree nodes, with children that are tree nodes, with children that are tree nodes. Oh my God, that is a huge family. And so if we start to look at these attributes, you have things like show sky node. Constellations enabled, show constellation pictures, show constellation figures, and then the name of it. This is a little localization function which I think would detract from what I'm trying to go over here. But just know that there's a way to do localization declaratively and procedurally in script, and this is the function that does it. And then there's some commented out stuff, and this sort of shows the history of like where we tried to stub everything out, like show solar system CMB or solar system Cosmos. Those are commented out. In this demo, we're going to actually delete that because we have the history in GitHub, and we can just go look at it any time if we want to see it. I think too much comments in code is pretty jarring to other people trying to read your code. So I'm going to, as part of this, just start pruning this out. And it also shows that, if you see stuff that you think might not want to be there, submit a pull request and start taking some of this code out if you want to help contribute to the web client effort. Miguel has a question. Well, the HTML5 SDK is a subset of Worldwide Telescope Windows Client, and so the Solar System Cosmos, the one I just deleted, that was there because it was there in the Windows client, but we don't have that today. I know that's your feature, and you're like, when are we going to get all these galaxies into here? I know. But no, it's not there. So, and it becomes kind of confusing for people. We had a lot of people say, hey man, can you just get the stuff that is not functional, just get it out of the layer manager and make it work. And so this is just sort of historical stuff. So we're going to delete that. But so going back to the slide deck, model is stored as a string in local storage, so the state is sticky and stored in the browser. So that's another thing that is super interesting. Is we have this object called set, or app state. And app state is just basically a proxy to store the state of the application in your local storage. And so anytime we make a change to a node, we will set this as a JSON object, and we'll store the tree. So this tree here, this thing that gets returned by init tree is, and I know this is a little bit, this might make you dizzy, and I'm really sorry. I'm trying to cram as much as I can as possible. Scope.tree in Angular, whatever you set to your scope becomes your model, and it's viewable by the template. So we call init tree, and we say this is a bunch of stuff to say whether we need a new tree or we want to get what exists in the layer manager. And we have a little versioning system too, because as you can see, we're on version 5. If the whole tree changes, we don't want people to try to load an old tree into a new template. So that's why we version it. So back to the problem. Okay, we talked about the actions. We did a grunt watch. These slides are reversed. So this is what we need to do. We basically need to write a function that will set the disabled state of the descendant checkboxes based on the parent checked state, or disabled state. And so I'm gonna pull out of a reading mode here. Let's see, what is this? Do I go normal? And I'm gonna copy that code. Or I'm gonna pretend that I just thought of it. So we're going to copy this, and this is just a function. Nobody's called it yet, so we're just going to paste this function here near the invoke setting method. So I think right now is a good time to pull up from the controller and actually look at how the view works after I paste this in. You guys want to look at this for a little while, or you guys have it in the slide deck, so if you want to look at that function and think about what it might be doing, you're welcome to open that in the PowerPoint. I'd like to show you guys the layer manager HTML, just so you can see how the view works. So the layer manager view, declares that, hey, my controller is the layer manager controller, and I'm hidden if this variable is true, and this is the close button, and it calls this. Anything that you see prefixed with ng is something that you're going to find as a scope variable. So a function can be a variable, a model can be a variable, and so anything like ng click equals tree.collapse. So we are now in the scope of we're in sort of the function scope of the scope object in the controller that's defined by the controller. So the controller's job is to set everything up for the view, and the view goes, oh, okay, I'm great now. controller needs to fetch model data from a factory or a service, or it needs to set things so that the view can write its own fancy logic. And this is a place where I used a bunch of include files and repeaters to get each of the layer manager settings in the right tree. And so it just reads, says, hey, if you have children, let's repeat on the children. If you have children, repeat on the children, and so forth. And it's sort of this, this is the best way I could find to get it in a least amount of code. I'm not sure if I could have done it with recursion, and that kind of makes my brain hurt, but maybe. So looks like what we need to look at is the tree node, because that's where the checkboxes are being output. So you guys with me so far? Are you guys following the layer manager HTML? It looks like people here in Redmond are following it.
Yep.
Okay. So we'll go over to the tree node, and you can see how you can include an HTML file. You can also use a directive to do that. I happen to use ng-include a lot. So this this checkbox here, so we're actually, as you can see, we're using visual checkboxes. I'm going to show you the, just so we can see it again. These look an awful lot like the button style in World by Telescope, and just designed it that way to have sort of that look and feel. And those are rendered with a pseudo selector, the pseudo element before, and so this label outputs this what looks like the checkbox, and this checkbox itself is actually hidden. The user never sees that, but we use the input because it's a good way to track checked and unchecked. So let's go over really quick. Basically, the class of this label is checked based on an expression, based on whether the node that was passed into it. And so each time one of these tree nodes is rendered out, it's got a scope that is where its context in the repeater was. So it's each time this is rendered, that node refers to a setting, a tree node in the model. And so it's got children, possibly. It has a name. It has an action. And now it's going to have a disabled status. So what we're going to go ahead and do is look at sort of the next set of changes. And I think if I'm... No! I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, we're not going to do that yet. Because I promised I would not deviate from the script. So let's go back to the layer manager controller and make some changes. We're gonna change this function, and I'll show you both versions of the function and why we're changing it. So invoke setting today has this like try catch. Now, why would it throw an error? Well, I started looking at that, and I said, oh, the reason it throws an error is because there's no node action, or the node action is null, and I'm trying to do an operation on it. And so I changed this, and if node action, to if I'm not disabled, and I do have an action associated with me, then this is a real, it's sort of a cute shortcut. So these action names map to the actual settings in the settings object of that script interface that I showed you guys earlier, if you remember that. So we look for the presence of that. If that's there, then this expression will return true, and we can proceed. And then we can set the setting flag, which is going to be a true or false. So you can set, show constellation pictures, for example, to true or false based on this expression right here. So we're generally following the logic of what I'm trying to do here, or is this a little bit confusing. Like, Chris, you're sort of squinting your eyes. Yeah, well, yeah, and it is, and in general, like, Angular it's sort of you have to remap your brain a little bit. When I first learned Angular, it was a lot of it was really intuitive, but a lot of it was a little bit like, what's going on here? It's in the web client. Yeah. So it's in the, if you want to follow, and just for those of you remote, I'm talking to Chris Laurel, and he was asking questions about following along. Well, HTML5 SDK, if you open that solution, it will open both the web client and the SDK. And so the web client is basically a place where you can test, like if I make a change to the SDK, then I can test that functionality in the web client in real time by running the project. And if you have Grunt Watch going, Grunt will say, oh, you just changed the SDK, compiled it, cool, I'm going to modify the file a little bit, put some special sauce on it, and bundle it all up and launch the web client. So that's sort of the virtue of running the Grunt, just to go back to that really quick. It's in web client / controllers / and it's layer manager controller. So so code like this is it's cute, and in some ways it's efficient, but in some ways it also is difficult to understand because you've got this node.action and a settings, which is basically you're creating a string on the fly and creating a setting that's going to get invoked as part of a calculation. So that's what the tricky bit of this code is. But I liked when Doug asked me to do this because I was like, well, there's a lot of sort of obscure things that I can explain that will help people to understand. So you guys ready to move on? Is everybody following still?
Yes.
Okay. So I just commented at this function, and we said, okay, invoke setting. Let's look at where invoke setting is called from. So when we initialize the tree node, so we have to sort of follow along. And so who is init tree node? Who calls the init tree node? Besides itself, this is a recursive function also. So if we go to not the definition, find references, and we can see that it's called at the top of this. Init layer manager. Okay, so init tree node. Okay, so init tree node right here is wrapped in the timeout function. And anyone know what the timeout function is there for?
Ron? There's a question. Ron?
Huh?
Oh, sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can now.
I don't know if this is relevant at all. Init tree node is taking an argument I, which it is not using. Do we care about that? Is that cross-product of something else?
Oh, but it is using it. It is using it. I'm so glad you asked. Yay. So yeah, it's taking this 0 here, which is mapped to the I. That's a very good question. So we're actually going to prune this right here because we don't want to start at the first child of the sky. So if we look at this visually, what that's saying is start at overlays, since if we collapse everything, we don't want to start here or here. We want to start right at the sky, which is the tree itself. So we're going to prune that off. Say, oops, that was a mistake. And the reason why 0 is passed in is if we look down at the init tree node itself, it's recursive. And the jQuery each function, you can do it either with a named function, which in this case is init tree node, but it always passes in 2 parameters, and that is either the key or the index is the first thing, and then the item or the value. So if you're in an array, it will pass the the next item in the array. If you're in an object and you're traversing the keys and values, these are key and value. So since we love these, the web developer for the web client likes jQuery eaches, that's my traversal method of choice. That's what I went ahead and did, is just put this here as sort of a placeholder. It's for jQuery.
So the I is used implicitly? Is that just a jQuery thing, or?
It's just the index of where you're at in the collection. So if you're traversing a collection of 10 length, it's going to go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 each time it hits that. And when you're passing parameters to a function, they are ordered, and they're not named. It's not like I can write I can't write an override for this. So I do need that placeholder there, even though we're not consuming the I. We know it's getting passed in, and this is getting passed in as the second parameter from this callback. So this is essentially a callback for each member of the collection. That's how a jQuery each operates.
Okay, but we have to take. Okay, I get it. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. No, it's a good question though, and it helps to just sort of understand what's going on. So we're just traversing that tree and invoking the setting, and invoke setting here. We've just rewritten it to call our happy little function, which is we want to set the child state of each node if that changes. Now, invoke setting is not only just called on initialization, so that's to set the initial state of the tree based on, we sort of have a default checked state. If we look in this model, checked is false, checked is true, and I think its default state is checked if it's not specified. So, but it's also, if I go through and say, hey, I want my constellation pictures on by default, then the layer manager will show up with the constellation pictures checked by default. So that's all handled by that initialization function. And then when we do a node change, so going back to our tree node, we see that every time there's this little thing called ng change, it calls node change. And node change is a scope level function. That's why it's not var node change, it's scope.nodeChange. And then this is the argument we passed into it, which is the context node that is in that template. And I think it's just elegant as hell that Angular is able to provide that real seamless way of having that context to that particular node, but it all happens in one file and one controller. It's really, I really think it's elegant to work that way. So we basically set the state of the layer manager, save that to memory, and then we invoke the setting for the node. And the setting will be based on the checked state of setting flag. Now, do you notice here we didn't actually change the checked state of the node, and we're not visually showing real checkboxes. Anyone know why? Where does the checked state get handled? That's the visual output, but we're on that there's definitely a property in the model that's looking at the checked state. Where does that model property get set? Aliens? We have a guess for aliens?
Aliens.
No. And I believe in aliens. That's another topic. But they didn't do this. NG modeled it. Anyways, I'm losing my voice. Hang on a second, get a little drink of water. So the model, when you declare ng model, it says, okay, I'm binding. It's basically a two-way binding. So every time I check this, then the bit on the model also checks, because this template is hard two-way bound to the model variable node.checked. And so you can only bind a checkbox to a Boolean model variable, because you can only have those two states. And so now this gets to the fun. So we've done the invoke setting, and now we know that we need to update our tree node to set some CSS. So in this code, I bolded the places that are new, and there's about 5 ways that you can set an ng class. Ng class stands for like Angular class, and that means that it's a calculated class based on the expression that you put in it. And you'll see that currently there's one. I can't copy that. I'm trying to copy it. There's one way of doing it, and we're gonna revert that and replace this. See how there's sort of a nested expression in here? Here's another way to write that expression, and if you check out the ng class documentation, you can see a lot of cool examples. So you have to, instead of having double mustaches, you have like the single mustaches, or curlies, whatever you guys want to call it. They're laughing over here in Redmond. I don't know why. So what that means is I'm going to have a checked class if node.checked is true, and I'm going to have a disabled child class if the node is disabled. So that's pretty cool. But we also need to have the checkbox itself respect the state of the node disabled flag. So copy that guy right there, and all we need to add in our checkbox is this guy right here. And so we haven't added any CSS, and haven't. All we've done is modified this tree node file and changed this function and added this cute little recursive function, and really just started traversing the tree at the top. So that's all we've done. So I would say at this point, let's save all the files and right-click default ASPX and view in browser. By the way, when you see the NuGet package restore failed for script sharp, ignore that. We have a sort of a in the wild version of script sharp that didn't actually get added to the NuGet package manager, but it was one that the developer script sharp published on GitHub, and he gave instructions to do that. So it's just a little side note. So let's look at this. If I uncheck overlays, it didn't work. Why the heck didn't it work? Yeah. When you have your debug window open and you get this option of empty cache and hard reload. Okay, so now let's uncheck overlays. It didn't work. All right.
It should always work the first time.
Ah, panic. Okay, so no change. Your manual trigger. Okay. Well, we didn't add a disabled flag here, but we don't need it really because we can set that on the fly. And all right, let's see. This got saved. No, okay. I don't see why it's not working. I had this working at home. Works on my machine. But I reverted it all so I could do it live again. Got to like a clean state in the tree. Oh, this is not good. We're running the developer version of Chrome. which is canary. Oh, I know. Let's do debug. Okay, and then that way we can step through each of these guys and see if we have a problem. But first, let's just see if it works. Yes, okay. So it works functionally, but visually, what's missing?
Class. This is class on
The visual indication isn't there. So, and I'm sort of I'm a little bit OCD about the visuals. I spent a lot of time trying to get the CSS to look exactly like the web or the Windows client, so people be like, wait, am I in the Windows client or am I in the browser? So in this case, I'm going to diverge a little bit from the Windows client behavior because the checkboxes already look different. I'd like them to have a little bit more visual indication of what's going on. So here's some CSS, and we're going to go spelunking into the webclient.less file and get Liz and CSS, and we open up webclient.less, and yeah, this is about where we want it to. It's so we're about 900 lines down. For those that are following along, 900 lines, 975, almost 10,000 or 1,000 lines down, we start to see how the checkbox is actually rendered, and it uses this little before selector to inject, a checkbox and set the color, and then it uses these reusable mixins. And for the buttons, we have this class called box gradient, and then for when you hover over it, we have this thing called box highlight. And just real quick, I'll show you that. The variables, this is where we override the Bootstrap settings to sort of set a brand, sort of a color palette and whatnot. And these are all sort of the overrides to the Bootstrap library. And then we have box gradient here. We have a little text shadow. We have, this color border and some box shadows. And little fun fact for those of you who are into CSS, you can actually use multiple box shadows. So in box highlight, we're using an outer and an inner box shadow. This first one is inset, and this next one is outset. And it's fun to just play with a magnifying glass and blow things up, zoom in, and look at tweaking each of these things, which you can do in really any browser debugger. Do it in IE, you can do it in Firefox, you can do it in Chrome, and it's a lot of fun. And if you're like me and you like to tweak things, that's a fun place to start, and then you can start fiddling around with visualizations and whatnot. So going back to our checkbox, I think we should probably paste these in right about here at about line 10,000 or 1018, and let's just have a look at what we did. So we have disabled child. Cursor default is going to make it so that we don't have the little finger pointer that looks like it's a link, so it's sort of dead. It's just the regular sort of angled arrow. The before, that's a pseudo element that CSS creates. CSS has really over the years gotten to be more of a scripting language and more of even a markup language than just a style sheet, because you can do things like actually inject content onto the page because of a CSS class, like these checkboxes, for instance. And so we're going to use the text muted color. That's a variable. We're going to say no background image, so that's the gradient that was behind it. No box shadow, and change the border back to this. And this should actually be a variable, but I'll procrastinate doing that because we're short on time. So doing the same thing for the before when you hover, Over here, when you hover, you get this box highlight. So in order to override that box highlight, we're going to have to find the properties that we want to override and change the box shadow to none and the border to this, because it's a brighter, more vivid border. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to grapple on that. I'll just show you the this window, which is watching the less, and watch what happens when I save this. Oops. Oh, that was fun. Wait a second. It didn't actually compile it.
Is the grunt supposed to compile that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't do it for me either.
Oh, weird.
Good warnings.
It was like hung on something. Because now it looks like it's got like a queue of tasks that it saw, and now it's doing it. So it just minified and uglified the file. So this explains why we weren't seeing the file, the update when I was running in production mode. Once I changed to debug, it's because grunt apparently was hung, and once I hit Control-C, it started working again. So I don't know what that is. I've never seen that before.
It's Windows 10.
You don't like Windows 10?
I've noticed there's like this stuff in the not in focus or stuff like that. It just sits there and then it doesn't do anything. See that?
Look at that. Look at that. Look at those settings. So, dun, 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 dun. Let's make it a little bigger. So if we check these, just check at that level. It seems to obey. Check at the grid level. Let's uncheck constellations, and let's see like a galactic grid. Okay, and let's see if this state persists. The disabled state persists. Now let's uncheck this and see if we have no grids and no constellations, and these are all disabled when we refresh the page. Furious testing. All right. So did I fix the bug?
Yay.
The question is, was this useful? Did you guys? Was this like too weird? Did it make a lot of sense? Well,
That's great.
It was really, really, really useful, and I hope we got it recorded.
good.
Yeah. Yeah, and so just so people know, the recording ends in 20 minutes. We can go another hour, so if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to switch on to LC API, because that's another important thing to try to capture.
Well, actually.
Okay, and I will check this in really quick.
Okay, so in order to speed things up, I fixed the projector in the other room and managed to reboot everything, and the room is now functional, so I'm already set up and ready to go. Now we can get our desks back, and all the food is moved into the other room. So we'll go ahead and
Here's what
back to the original room.
Ron, since you're connected now, why don't everybody there move from your room to the other room, and then Ron, while you're connected, do the check-in phase for the next couple minutes, okay?
Yeah. So.
Okay. Well, I just made the commit. Do you guys want me to not do the check-in phase now?
No, do it.
You already committed?
Yeah, I'm checking it in now. I told you we were going to do it live on TV, you know?
But I just wanted
Yeah, see how committing works.
Here it is. You ready? Woo!
That's because it's like
A live bug fix on TV. All right. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
Get add and commit.
Yeah.
Get push. Hopefully.
Here, I'll push mine.
So Ron, you're gonna hate me for this.
Yeah.
What?
The reason I wanted to do that was to get the relevant issue numbers into the commit message, which is a good thing in an open source project.
That's a good question. Is there a workflow from Visual Studio to put in a comment or or some?
Well, he wrote it.
Oh, you did. Okay.
It's here, yeah.
Ron?
Yeah?
Hey, the reason I was stressing the seeing the commit stage was to get the relevant issue ticket numbers into the commit message, which I think if the commit I'm looking at is the one, then they're not there, which is okay. But we should document that that's a thing, a standard practice for next time.
Okay, do you know what the issue number is?
I don't have it off the top of my head, except maybe number 70. I thought there might be several. Doug knows one.
There might be. I think that's a good
There
point.
is